All right. Hey, my friend is gonna join us here probably in a couple minutes here. Just double check because it's pretty big news today that Jim Brown has passed. So yeah, Howard Balzer, we have him set up here for 4:30, so he should be coming up here in a couple minutes. And I want to get his take on the passing of Jim Brown. As I said, one of the truly iconic football players. And dude, I was just starting to get into the topic, but I had to tell you that story there. They made a lot of money. They made Dallas. Dallas has been on the show. We've had Dallas. Diamond Dallas has been on the National Football Show. We had him on, I think, a year ago. I think Dallas Page. I think we had him on a year ago. We put him on. Yeah. Because I don't want to get into the topic here just yet here, because I got two topics that I think, as we're getting ready for training camp, that I'd like to see them really figure out who they're going to put in there. But boy, I'll tell you something. All that being said here, and before I bring my friend Howard Balzer in, I want to put this jersey up, and I want to remind you guys one more time. Here's my uncle here who played against Jim Brown, Robustelli. And can you imagine those great Chuck Bednarik, Robustelli, and Sam Huff games with Jim Brown? And I asked my uncle years ago, what was it like playing against Jim Brown? He said, you could have swore you heard a whistle like on a train when he ran through the line of scrimmage. It was like a whistle. And before I want to set this up with Howard here, because I said that there's 5 players in NFL history where you turn the tape on and you go, that's not normal. LT, Jerry Rice, Jim Brown, Tom Brady would be your Mount Rushmore guys. Okay, those are, you just watch Lawrence Taylor, you went, that's not normal. Let's bring in Hall of Fame voter, and by the way, now writes for phnx.com, phoenix.com, and we're going to get his thoughts also on the Cardinals, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask Howard on a day like this. Wow. I mean, Howard, of all the players that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, is there any more revered player than this guy who passed away today, the great Jim Brown?
Probably not. I mean, there might be many that are close to being as revered as him, but you mentioned Mount Rushmore. You can make the argument, hey, there should only be one on Mount Rushmore, and you can make the argument for Jim Brown. And it's when I just heard it, obviously just a short time ago, and you're going, man, one right after the other, but what a life. 87 years old. He just turned in February, and he was still making trips to Canton in recent summers as best as he could to get around. And it's just, what can you say? I mean, it's hard to put into words. I will say this, that, and you were talking about Andy Robustelli and the defensive players then, back then when he was playing, I mean, most of the defensive linemen were about the same size as him.
Right. Right.
And so, I'm not trying to diminish what he accomplished, obviously, but he was a man among boys, and he was just so big and so strong, and what an athlete. I remember a story about him. He played lacrosse at Syracuse. He ran track. And I remember hearing a story, I don't know which year it was that he was in college, and it was springtime, and he was playing lacrosse. He was a member of the lacrosse team, and something happened on it might have been a relay or something like that with the Syracuse track team, and they were playing the same day as the lacrosse team right around the same time. And so someone said, hey, Jim, we need some help. Can you help us in this track meet? He said, hey, I got a lacrosse game. I have a lacrosse game. Well, what he ended up doing was the lacrosse game ended. He went over to the track, and then he ran, I think it was a relay. He ran the relay and helped his team win. So, the guy was just not human in a lot of ways. And then you throw in, all the things that he did post career with how much he meant in the community in Los Angeles and what he tried to do for young people. Just a great man. I mean, that's really, really the best way to describe it.
Howard, outside the quarterback position, I mean, like I was saying, when I used to tune on those old VCRs and you watched Lawrence Taylor, or you can watch Reggie picking up people and slingshotting them, or Jerry Rice running through the tunnels, and there's just certain guys that you just go, that's different than the rest of those guys. No disrespect to Earl Campbell, Eric Dickerson, Emmett, none of those guys. But when you talk about position players, is he the greatest position player, not quarterback, named here in pro football history, would you say?
Well, you can make the case for it. And I've always been one to make blanket statements about this guy's the best, that guy's the best. And you mentioned Earl Campbell, and I always often, when the conversation turns to this, I often think back to when Earl Campbell came to the Oilers in 1978 and Bum Phillips was the head coach. And he was like Jim Brown, a man among boys. There's certain guys, it wouldn't matter the era, it wouldn't matter the team they played with and what was around them, they would be great. I mean, you could perhaps make the case that with Jerry Rice, if he had gone to a different team,
Yep,
that maybe he wouldn't have been the same Jerry Rice we saw, but not guys like that. And I'll always remember, though, back to the point I was going to make, that one day Bum Phillips was asked about it. And I don't know if the question was, is Earl Campbell the greatest running back in the history of the game? Is the greatest you've ever coached, the greatest you've ever seen? Whatever the question was, Bum thought for a moment, and then in his classic Texas drawl said, well, I don't know if he's the best, but he's among them. And that's really almost all you can say. But, to say that there was anybody better than Jim Brown, certainly even at running back, but just generally, I mean, heck, when you're talking about so many different positions, there's so much greatness. You mentioned Lawrence Taylor. He'd been great wherever he played. Reggie White would have been great wherever he played, whoever the coach was, whatever the system, any of those things. And I don't know that there's that many. There's certainly a lot, but, there a lot of guys aren't, you can't say that about. You certainly could, obviously, for Jim Brown.
I'm going to make a pitch at the end of our interview here for Eric Allen again. I'm going to do that here in a second, but I want to get to the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm not going to pollute my question, and I'm not going to be a politician here or a lawyer here and give you a leading question. But I do want to ask you about Jonathan Gannon, your takeaway so far and what you've thought of him being around him.
It's early. I mean, I think the guy he has certain things, the certain mannerisms, the certain little buzzwords that he says. And I'll say this, he does a very good job, I think, of saying very little, but making it sound good. Right? We've been trying to pin him down on what's the defense going to be, and he wouldn't say anything. And so, but, generally from talking to him, and not only in press conferences, but, a couple of times, one-on-one, I think the guy's a good guy. I think he has a way he wants to do things. Obviously, it's way early in the process. He doesn't. I'll say one thing, Dan. He doesn't have a whole lot to work with right now, but he is sure trying to make it look better than it is. Talking about that. Hey, someone asked him at one of the press conferences. I think it might have been, I don't know if it was post-draft or the week after, whenever it was, doesn't matter. But someone asked him about the rebuild. And he was together with Monty Ossenfort when they were having this press conference. And they used the word rebuild, and Monty answered it. Or I'm sorry, yeah, but then before he could answer it, John, hold it. You just made me cringe with that word. And he didn't say what word it was, but it was the word rebuild. He said, our goal is to win football games. Well, of course, you have to say that as a head coach. But he doesn't have a whole lot to work with right now. They're hopeful, obviously, that a lot of young guys and a lot of bargain basement free agents that they've signed are going to come in and compete hard and play hard and give them a chance to win who knows how many games, but he's up against it in this first year, obviously, as a head coach with talent, with personnel. You don't know when Kyler Murray's going to be available to play. The DeAndre Hopkins situation remains in limbo, and it's, but I think I think you have to give it time. But I think like I said, he has a certain way that he wants to do things. I know there's a lot of pushback against him in Philadelphia, but hey, in Philadelphia they push back against just about everybody.
The only problem, Howard, that I have with him is exactly what you said. I mean, I just like my coach to be direct. Not everything is supposed to be put out there on a silver platter where everything's supposed to look good. Everyone knows the Cardinals are in a rebuild. And when you say you're not, you kind of are like a bullshitter a little bit. And it comes up. And by the way, like you said, coaches don't have to win press conferences. Nick Sirianni's was not the best. It was weird as it could get. Even Belichick's press conference in New England was horrific. So it doesn't really put an indictment on him. But again, to me, that's been my issue. And again, maybe, you know what, they want to try to put as much goodwill on Arizona right now as possible because of some of the things that have been going on in Park Avenue. So I get all that too. Howard, I mean, they want a good look right now to sell to the fans. Is that okay?
No, yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think also, but you're selling the players too. You're trying to sell players on this is the way it's going to be. This is the way we want things. We're trying to put something together here. Obviously, they're building, rebuilding. I mean, that's, everyone has their own, definition of it. But you certainly don't want to be, saying one thing. You can certainly say some things different behind closed doors to players. But you just can't be coming out and saying, hey, we're in a rebuild here. We know we're not going to win many games or whatever it might be. And then you turn around in the locker room and the players are looking at you going, come on. I mean, hey, we're going to try to win games. And obviously they will. Doesn't mean that they will, obviously. But I think it's a coach's way. I mean, we know that coaches BS us all the time.
I do.
And I mean, that's just the reality of it. And you have to cut through it all and then, report on it yourself the way that you believe it should be reported. And that's, pretty much, what I've done. I mean, they say, oh, we're so excited by free agency. I mean, boy, I wrote it. I mean, I wrote that it was like they were shopping at the dollar store. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go out and spend crazy 5-year, 6-year contracts on guys, but they didn't sign any player in free agency, Dan, that got more than a 2-year contract. And it was interesting, too, because I added up the numbers. They signed, I believe, 21 guys in free agency. That includes guys they re-signed who were unrestricted free agents. And the signing bonuses totaled what a guy they lost, one of their best defensive players, Zach Allen, who went to Denver as a free agent. Zach Allen got a $15 million signing bonus, and that's about what the Cardinals spent total on 21 free agents. And the guaranteed money was $5 million less than what Zach Allen got. So obviously that was their plan. Just, sign a whole bunch of hungry guys to 1-year deals that know they're going to be free agents again next year. And hope that some of them, come through and play good football and see if they can steal a few games. But it's a tough schedule, tough division, obviously. And I mean, heck, the numbers say it all. I mean, I saw a story this week that they're underdogs in every game in advanced betting lines, which what does that mean in May? But the other thing is their over-under in wins is 4.5. It's the lowest of any team in the NFL. They have the longest odds to win the Super Bowl, which isn't a surprise. And I just finished putting together another edition of Lindy's Pro Football Magazine, which I've done now for 31 issues. And I don't know how it's going to fall as I'm going through all the stories. And we have rating points for every position on a team. And then you add up the points and you come up with a total. And I don't know how it's going to end up at the end. But the Cardinals were by far the lowest number of points, total points, position by position of any team in the NFL. So that's all out there, and that's reality. And we'll see. But yeah, you're right. They're trying to sell at least hope, and at least that they will be a team that will play, will improve and get better as the season goes on. But when you have a quarterback that's not going to be available, who knows, until maybe halfway through the season, and an offensive line that you don't even have a clue right now who one of your guards or your center is going to be, and you don't have any real veterans at those spots, there's a lot of question marks, obviously.
Budda Baker, will he be on the Cardinals in September?
I think, and I'm saying think, I think he will be. I'm you see all this about the contract, and I know it was reported on nationally that Monty Ossenfort in his first year as general manager doesn't want to start a precedent of giving a guy a new contract when he has 2 years remaining on it. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what are you worrying about setting a precedent for? There's nobody else on this roster who would have the cojones to walk into his office or his agent to call him and say, hey, we want a new contract with 2 years left. There's nobody else that fits that bill. But Budda Baker is the epitome of what you would want on your roster in terms of ability, in terms of passion for the game, in terms of a guy who just hates to lose. We saw that on Hard Knocks last year. It would seem to me that if the money is the issue, then just figure it out. I mean, he's not making that much less than some of the safeties that are making more than him. 2 years left on the deal. None of it's guaranteed. Give him a signing bonus, add a couple of years to it, and send a message to the locker room that we will take care of you when it's your turn. I think that's what they should do. Maybe they will in time. The one interesting thing about it is, Dan, I check every few days with the NFLPA website. And since this whole story broke, which is I guess we're almost a month ago now.
Yeah.
Almost a month. And when I checked back when it started, a few days after everything, broke with the whole story and the whole bit, he was listed as not having an agent. So that tells me he changed agents, right? Well, I just checked this week and they still don't list an agent.
Huh.
And so you start wondering, well, if it's about a contract, you're not going to get anything done until you hire an agent. So that's one of the little murky things about this that you wonder about, because Ossenfort said at the draft, he said, we're having ongoing conversations. I'm talking to his agent. I thought of saying, well, hold it. The NFLPA, who are you talking to? The NFLPA doesn't list them as having. Wow. So unless who knows, maybe he's being Lamar Jackson, is going to negotiate on it by himself. I don't know.
June 1's around the corner. Will DeAndre Hopkins be cut, traded, or do they restructure something? This one here, Budda Baker, it's a safety, and Howard, no one's going to put a Jamal Adams kind of deal together anymore. No one's going to put $20 million out there for a safety, I don't think. But for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, if you look at the numbers and you extrapolate them out, dude, this guy would have had 119 catches. He'd have had about 1,400 yards again if he doesn't get hurt. He's still, in my opinion, one of the best third down receivers in the game. You're a brand new head coach. Isn't that something the organization would try to maybe come to some sort of understanding and try to keep that guy on your team? Why would you want to move him?
No, it's a great question. And the one thing that we don't have a lot of clarity on is certainly the belief is that he wanted to go somewhere else, or he wants to go somewhere else. And as as a guy who's going to be 31 in a few weeks in early June, and even though he did have pretty good numbers last year after he came back from a suspension, he did have an injury. He did have a hamstring injury a little bit later in the season. He had that the year before, and the knee injury, making a lot of money. But so that's the one uncertain part of this is, does he badly want out and doesn't even want to talk about coming back with the Cardinals, even on a restructured contract, which, like Baker, would be pretty simple to do. Their situations are somewhat similar, even though Hopkins is older, but he has 2 years left, both no guarantees in it, and his salaries are a little bit higher than Baker's. But if you're going to have any shred of hope in terms of even when Kyler Murray comes back, then I don't see how you're going to do it without DeAndre Hopkins on the roster. So certainly after June 1st, it becomes they save more on the cap, but they don't have any cap issues right now for this year. Even with his cap hit right now, that's close to $30 million. They're about $16 million under the cap. And so they don't need to save against it. Now, I will say this, that the more cap dollars you have available at the end of this year, they roll in and add to what you have the following year. But it's not like they have to do something for cap reasons. And again, it comes down to another team, is that how much market is there? As good as he can be, he will be 31. He's had some injuries, and we don't totally know what he wants in terms of the contract. And this is a guy, Dan, when he signed the contract he's in now, negotiated it himself right after the Cardinals traded for him in 2020. But then this offseason, he hired an agent. And I assume because of, obviously you hire an agent because you want him to take care of whatever it's going to be, whether it's with the Cardinals or a new team. But obviously the market wasn't there for him in terms of a trade, because he would have been traded already if there was. And so, but we also know that trades are very dependent on contracts. And that's one of the reasons the Cardinals, I mean, here in Arizona, people were going, oh, the Cardinals shouldn't let him go unless they get a number one. Well, they didn't get a number one for him. And that was 3 years ago. And the reason they weren't able to, or they didn't have to, and the Texans weren't able to get more, was because everybody knew that Hopkins wanted a new contract. And the Cardinals knew it, and they gave it to him. So there's all these tentacles to this story that makes it hard to predict what will happen. I mean, it would be shocking to me if they just cut him, unless that's totally what he wants and he refuses to play for the Cardinals. And obviously if they cut him, then the whole contract goes away and he has to negotiate from scratch. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the next couple of months before training camp.
The folks in Philly probably have an interest in this one. Where is Zach Ertz's place on this roster? I mean, I saw some reports a couple days ago where there's a potential he could be a guy that's cut loose after June 1st, and that they go in a different direction with him, and he goes somewhere else too. Does he have a place in this offense? And again, I think it's really hard, Howard, to put and predict anything right now because of the status of Kyler Murray, and I get that. Because what are you going to even open up the season with in September here? You've got to have some viable points to be able to move the sticks. And he's probably maybe the lesser and the cheaper of the two between him and Hopkins. But where's his place on this roster?
I would think there's a place for him, but again, I don't know. We don't read the minds of the hierarchy. There's no. I mean, he signed a 3-year contract. I'd have to look at it to see what the benefit is to have waited until after June 1st, when you can split some of the signing bonus over 2 years. It's not going to save them, all that much to do that. And it does push cap to next year if you do that. And so, but to me, there is a place for him on the roster. And it's granted, we don't know when he's going to be available to play. Everyone talks about Kyler Murray, but he tore his ACL also, even though it was a few weeks before Murray. And he's hoping to be ready for week 1, but obviously there's no guarantee that is going to happen. And so, again, it comes down. I mean, but here's another guy who, even if you accept that it's a rebuild, you still, to me, want leaders in your locker room. I mean, hey, here's a situation where they drafted Paris Johnson Jr. in the first round. They have DJ Humphries as the left tackle. He's making a ton of money, but of course he just signed a restructured deal last summer. So I think there would be some real cap ramifications to that if they moved on. But to me, you can't be preaching character and leadership and things like that are so important to your roster and then start getting rid of your leaders. I mean, that to me doesn't make sense. But then again, some of the things they've done have kind of raised an eyebrow. I mean, I talked about free agency, and everyone thought that with all the quarterbacks available, the Jacoby Brissetts and the Gardner Minshews and, different guys like that, Marcus Mariota, whoever you can list, that the Cardinals would have signed another, more of a veteran presence.
Would they be interested in Carson Wentz?
I don't know. That one surprised me a little bit, only because he's just, it seems he's burned too many bridges. Maybe burning bridges is not the right way to put it, but there's just too many questions, about him right now. But who knows? Maybe that would be the case. There's some questions about Colt McCoy, who hasn't participated in off-season work. At the mini camp they had before the draft, he wasn't even throwing the ball. But hey, you're going to open the season most likely with him as your starter, and who's his backup? Is it David Blough? Is it the rookie Clayton Tune?
Wow.
So, and the only thing they did in free agency was re-sign Blough and sign Jeff Driscoll. That was the veteran free agent that they signed. So they've done a bunch of things that kind of raise your eyebrows. But to me, when you have a guy like Ertz, who loves it here, loves Arizona, is great in the community and all those things, and I know it's business. I know it's all about, those things, but I don't know that that's a good message to send your team if you start moving on from even more guys than you already have.
I'll tell you what, Howard, I might want to cover Arizona State football. I don't know. Hey, two last questions here for you. Deshaun Jackson is going to, and obviously everyone knows Howard's a Hall of Fame voter. Deshaun Jackson, the first player in NFL history to be named to the Pro Bowl as a special teams and also as a wide receiver. 700 receptions, 1,200. One of the greatest deep threats in the history of the game. Too far outside the room for someone like that to be considered? I mean, do you think Torrey Holt's – you covered Torrey Holt. You think Torrey Holt's a better player than Deshaun Jackson?
Well, he wasn't as much of a deep threat, certainly, but he could go deep. And he was certainly a lot more consistent over time and put up the numbers. And I think there's other guys that I would say, the guys that are there now as finalists that haven't gone in for a couple of years.
Reggie Wayne.
You've got Jimmy Smith, on the outside, who hasn't, been a finalist at this point. And there's just so many receivers that, to me, as great a deep threat as he was, the overall consistency just wasn't there. But he was a fun player to watch. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I do think he just falls a notch below a lot of some of these other guys that we've been talking about.
I completely agree, but I'm going to make this last pitch here for Eric Allen here. And I'm going to put you on the spot. Did you put Leroy Butler in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I have to admit, I'll have to think back. I don't remember what I did in the reduction votes. Certainly when it got to the final five and he was a finalist, I voted yes, which most of us do when it gets to that point.
So it's a bigger deal for you on the 15 to get to the 5.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Interesting. Why is that? I as a guy who helps like Jared Bell and Jason Cole's on in the next hour, I'm on a bunch of these panels that, these guys ask me to reduce it from 15 for them. It's an opinion. They ask a bunch of guys, as you know. And so I give them my opinion on some of these guys and put some intel together for a bunch of you guys. I didn't realize that the 15 is the tougher one once you're down to the 5.
Yeah, to go from 15 to 10 to 5, it's first of all it's excruciating, and sometimes weird things happen in there. Like for last year, for example, I really believe one of the wide receivers was going to get in, and all three of them made the cut to 10, and there were, interestingly, Dan, 2 edge rushers that made it to the 10, and one of them, Dwight Freeney, did not make it to the 10. So I thought, 3 wide receivers, one of them is going to get in, and none of them did, and one of the edge rushers got in. And I've made the argument or the point that if it had been 2 wide receivers in the final 10 and 3 edge rushers, that one of the wide receivers might have had a better chance, because any split of the vote wouldn't be enough to keep one of them from getting to the top 5. And the one thing that I point out all the time, and I don't hear many say this, but the one thing we don't know is that, and remember, there's only 49 voters. There's going to be a 50th this year. When you go from 15 to 10, we don't know how many votes behind number 10 the 11th person was. It probably was pretty darn close. It might have been missing by a vote or two. And the very same thing might happen when you go from 10 to 5. And so that is.
So some of these guys get caught up in the process.
In the process, yes, absolutely. I believe that 100%. I believe that. And so with Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson, and Reggie Wayne, there's a lot of discussion about, hey, we got to get one of these guys in. We got to get one of these guys in. Well, enough. Some people vote for Wayne's in the cut to 5. Some people vote for Holt. Some people vote for Johnson, and it splits the vote. And none of them get enough to get to the final 5. Whereas the pass rusher DeMarcus Ware made it to the 5, and Jared Allen did not. And so, yeah, I think that's a part of it. And that's why. So when I became a selector, which is now around 20 years ago, one of the first years I did it, it doesn't matter who it was. I think there was one guy, maybe two, I don't remember, but there were some guys that I did not vote to get to the 5 that were in the 5. And so I said, well, hold it. If I didn't think they should go from 10 to 5, why should I vote yes for them? And so I voted no. Well, then one year we had Michael, the last time this happened, I think was 2006. That's a lot of years ago now, where Michael Irvin made it to the final 5 and didn't get enough votes to be enshrined. And what happened? He came back the next year, and now we're talking about him again. And now he gets to the final 5 again. And so I think what everyone in the room realized, we might. It's kind of like the whole wisdom of the crowd type of philosophy, that if there's enough people that vote no and it keeps somebody out, it's not going to keep them out forever. They're going to come back. And what does that do? Not only do you have to consider him again the next year, but it keeps somebody else from getting into the top 15 and being discussed.
Howard, so then do you look, say a guy who's a first ballot, a third ballot, Joe DiMaggio was a third ballot, 10th ballot, 11th ballot. To you, it's not really, it's like Brady when he says, it doesn't matter where you're drafted. It just doesn't matter as long as you're drafted. You take the opportunity. Do you look at a guy who's in the 10th year or somebody like an Eric Allen who's on the outside waiting in the process, and I look at Rondé Barber, and there's a lot of people, and I go, Rondé Barber, Eric Allen, I don't know. I get the title. I see that all decade. I got it. I'm totally – there's a great debate there. But do you look at any difference in a guy who goes in his second year versus a guy that goes in his 8th year? Do you care about that? Does that matter to you, or is that more about the player being butthurt over something like that? Do you not care about that?
No, I do care. And I do think that at times I think we're in a little too much of a rush sometimes to put in first-time eligible guys. Now, obviously, there's some guys that are just obvious. They're slam dunks. They're
Junior Seau. You're not going to argue that much.
Exactly. But Brian Urlacher went in the same year as Ray Lewis. Jason Taylor went in as a first-time eligible. And again, I'm not saying he's not. Now, some would say, well, if he's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer. Go in as a first time. Well, there's other guys that have been in that final 15 that have been waiting. And I think that at some point you have to go, you mentioned Torrey Holt. Torrey Holt, assuming he's a finalist, well, this next year will be his 10th year of eligibility. Wow. He's already halfway through the process.
Can't believe that.
Of his modern day eligibility. And you talk about the process. Here's a perfect example. I think it was 2014 or 2015, whichever year it was. Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Kurt Warner, and Orlando Pace, all from those great Rams teams, were first-time eligibles the same time. Well, the first year, Orlando Pace and Kurt Warner made it to the top 15. In my mind, Orlando Pace should have gone in as a first-time eligible.
Oh, absolutely.
Jonathan Ogden did.
Absolutely.
Walter
He's
Jones
in that
did,
conversation. Absolutely.
But Pace did not. And so what did
Crazy.
That do? It pushed him up to the next year when Warner and Pace were finalists were one of the 15.
I didn't realize Orlando Pace was in the first ballot because
then Pace went in the next year.
Crazy.
Then Isaac Bruce took a step into the 15 when Pace exited, and then Warner got in the next year. Took a couple of years for Bruce to get in, and in the year that I was actually a little surprised that Holt became a finalist the same year that Isaac Bruce was. I thought it was going to take Isaac to go out of it. But the point is, it delayed Torrey Holt from being a finalist because of the other guys on his own team. And so those are all the things that play a part in the process. And you wonder why. You talked about Leroy Butler. He wasn't even a semifinalist for like the first 10 or 12, maybe even longer time in his career.
That dude and Fred Dean, to me.
Same with Sam Mills. Mills.
Hey, Fred Dean and him, I was like, okay. I mean, I respect you guys a lot. You're caretakers, but I just was like, wow. Fred
and you
Dean.
mentioned Eric Allen, and I 100% I believe he's deserving. Albert Lewis, who
yes,
I would say
I agreed.
Should have been in before Ronde Barber. Maybe should be in before Eric Allen. He was a finalist this year for the first time in his career.
Look how long Ken Riley took.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he had to wait till he's a senior. Now Albert Lewis, this was his final year of eligibility, so he goes into the seniors now. So who knows how long it takes for him? And you just scratch your head and say, well, how could he have not at least been a finalist a lot earlier in his career? And so, a lot of times it's, out of sight, out of mind. You're not eligible.
You guys have a headache of a job. Let's just say it and leave it there with that. Howard, I love catching up with you. I'll make sure I tell Jason you said hi.
Definitely.
On a day like this, when we lose one of the truly NFL legends, you guys are the caretakers of the Gold Jackets and those 300 men that are in that building in Ohio. And I'm glad that my uncle's one of those guys too, by the way. So I'm kind of tied into that place myself. Thank you so much, Howard. God bless you, my friend. I appreciate you coming aboard. Thank you.
Take care. Always enjoy it.
You got it. Howard Balzer, make sure you check him out again. Go over to his website and make sure you check him out at gophnx.com. He writes there and he covers the Arizona Cardinals, a Hall of Fame voter. Appreciate him doing that all the time for us. Hit the like button. Keep it here on the National Football Show.
Weather forecasting is a team game.
Every day, updating the models